We've dealt with the desert, we've dealt with water, with rivers. We're now going to deal with another geographical issue, and a more geographical symbol within the Tanakh. And it's one of the most important ones in many ways, because it gives you an insight into the way in which they perceived cosmos. Cosmos, of course, is another word referring to our worldview, our way of seeing the universe, the way in which we interact with the universe. Now, of course, if before we had satellites, before we sent rockets up into space, when we just looked out and we saw by our common concept, the Earth seemed to be flat. And of course, that concept of the Earth being flat was really one that hasn't changed until quite recently. It was only during the Renaissance, so during the time in about the 13th century AD, that we began to realize again that no, actually the Earth wasn't flat, it was round. And of course, once we found out it was round, it opened up all the vistas for voyages of discovery all around the world. And we've discovered the new world and so on and so on. But you see, it's that process of actually looking at the world and how you see the world that determines a lot of who you are. Well, in the Old Testament, what they had, what you could call is a three-storied or three-tiered cosmos, three-tiered view of the world. And the three tiers essentially are that in the above you've got heaven, and that of course is the abode of God. Then you have earth, which is the abode of mankind. And then you have that which is below the earth. Now, exactly what is below the earth depends on which era in the writing of the scriptures that you come with. In the beginning, you have maybe a place of shadow called Sheol. Later on in the New Testament, below the earth becomes the place where the devil is, where hell is. So you have heaven, earth, and hell in terms of the three-tiered universe. And so in heaven, and you can see the twinkling of heaven through the stars, and the sun and the moon is all within this realm of heaven. Earth being the realm where mankind is. And so we see an image or a concept of this three-tiered universe in the story of the Tower of Babel. It's in the story of the Tower of Babel that, of course, they're building a tower in order to get closer to God, in order to reach God. And so you can see that immediately the only way they could think of reaching God was to build this tower to heaven. And of course, that's the story. It's the hubris, the sense of pride and arrogance of mankind thinking that they can somehow get to God. But of course, the only way they could think that they could get to God by building a tower was because they didn't see the world as round and as heaven as being in another reality. They saw heaven as being part of this reality, a real reality, a spiritual reality which was part and parcel of this physical one. And so when we see that, we realize that they lived within this three-tiered perspective of cosmology, of the world. Now the problem with that, therefore, or not the problem, but the reality of that means, is that therefore, how do you get closer to God? Well, you go and find yourself a mountain. And so the mountain concept, or the concept of mountains, is because mountains being high must be closer to heaven. And being closer to heaven means that therefore being on top of a mountain means that you are closer to God than you would be when you are in the valley, when you're back down in your particular village or your environment. And so that's what we need to come to terms with here, is that whenever we see the word mountain in the Bible, what it's really referring to is a place which is closer to the presence of God, a place where God's presence, it's easier for God to reach out to the top of a mountain than to the bottom of the valley. Now, we need to realize, though, that for Judaism, God was everywhere, though. He was both on the mountain and He was in the valley. We can see that, for example, in Psalm 121, a psalm which is often misinterpreted, because in Psalm 121 it says, I'm the Lord, I hear you. It says, when I cry out, where is the Lord? Well, I look to the hills, where is my God? Where is God? And it says, God is with us, because He's here with us in the valley, not just in the hills. He's not just up in the hills. In fact, that's where the bandits are going to come from, is the hills. But He's here with us right now in the valley as well. And that made Judaism very special. It was a very special thing because it meant that God was everywhere, not just on the high places. Yet, the concept of the high place is still very prevalent within Judaism. We've got the story of Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac, or at least attempting to sacrifice his son Isaac, on Mount Moriah. Some people believe that Mount Moriah is the same mount at which the temple was built in Jerusalem. You've got the Ten Commandments, which are given in Mount Sinai. You've got the Transfiguration Mountain, which was the Mount of Olives in the New Testament. So often these very special events, these times of particular connection with who God was and His presence with us, happens on the mountaintop. And so often that's what we call it, the mountaintop experience, the experience of the presence of God. So whenever you look at the geography concepts in the Old Testament, when you look at the Tanakh and you see the mountain mentioned, always connect that with a specific or a particular connection with God. So when Elijah runs the length of the land of Israel down to Mount Sinai and there cries out to God, again, that experience happens on a mountaintop. So the mountaintop becomes important not because it's a mountain, but because a mountain symbolizes our point of access to God, of God's particular presence and purpose for us.